scheduled to do this. We're going to talk today about a lot of different things, all centering on ultimately child fitness and wellness and the way that it impacts the academic bottom line. Because for teachers, that's the most important thing. And we're going to go through a series of steps in this. We're going to begin by talking about child health. We're going to talk about the obesity epidemic. We're going to talk about childhood nutrition and physical inactivity and the ways that those are impacting your ability to teach and a child's ability to learn. And then we're going to talk a little bit at the end about the Gen H Coalition, which stands for Generation Healthy, in case any of you were wondering. And we're going to talk about the programs that we've developed here in Sangamon County for the children in School District 186 and Riverton and Ball Chatham and all of our school districts throughout the county. Lest any of you think that I don't know what it's like to try and wrangle many, many, many things all at once. These are my 5 boys, and they are, you know, the last 2 in particular, we call them the twin terrorists. So, and I want to start with this quote, and I want you to sort of commit it to your memories or tattoo it on your brains or tattoo it on your butt. It doesn't really matter to me. Whatever you do, this is a very important thing to remember. The food that you eat can either be the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest and most insidious form of poison. Unfortunately, in our society in the United States today, the majority of the calories that we eat fall into that latter category. And one of the things that we are learning in food science, in health sciences, in public health, is that it is the quality of the foods that we eat that matters almost as much as the quantity. Are we eating too much? Yes, we are. But most importantly, we are eating too much of the wrong things. And we are feeding our children in particular the wrong things. And we are corrupting their taste buds, and we are impacting their brains and the neuronal pathways that they are laying down from a very, very early age. And it's creating intergenerational problems, wherein our children or adults, young adults, and even middle-aged adults grew up eating the wrong things, have taught subsequent generations to eat the wrong things, and now our taste buds have been so corrupted that good, healthy, nutritious, nutritionally dense, fresh, real foods no longer have the appeal that they once had. So a very, very serious statement. And it's led to a very, very serious problem. Obesity is poised to become the leading cause of preventable death in the next 5 to 10 years, replacing tobacco as this nation's leading killer. This was published in 2004. Obesity has surpassed tobacco as the leading cause of preventable death in this country. You have to be pretty bad to knock tobacco out of the #1 spot of preventable death, but it has. So let's talk about what obesity is and what obesity isn't, because it's such a loaded word and it has so many hurtful connotations associated with it, and it's not meant to be that, okay? So we need to begin by saying and making it very clear to everyone that obesity is a clinical diagnosis. It's something that we use in our practices as physicians or as health professionals to flag a chart. It means that a patient's BMI, body mass index, is greater than or equal to 30. Now, body mass index in an adult is a height to weight ratio. Body mass index in a child is a height to weight to months of life lived ratio. Very, very important, okay? Because sometimes you'll get overly concerned parents in who will say, I plugged in my child's height and weight, and their child's this big around, and it says that they're obese. Well, months of life lived is the key in a child, because little children do this, and then they do this, and then they grow out, and then they grow up, right? So we have to take that into account when we're sorting through their BMI. But in an adult, it's just body mass index. Now, why do we care about that? Well, we care about it not for aesthetic purposes, okay? We care about it because we know historically, clinically, that when a patient's BMI is greater than 30, they are at risk for a whole host of very serious medical problems, all right? Diabetes, hypertension, et cetera, et cetera. So as a physician, I know that that's a patient that I'm going to invite back sooner than later. Rather than having a 1-year follow-up, you might have a 6-month follow-up or a 3-month follow-up to make sure that their blood pressure is okay, that they're not becoming diabetic, et cetera, et cetera. That's the reason for it, okay? And it's due primarily to a simple imbalance between energy in and energy expended. Food in, energy out. Okay. It's a pretty serious problem, however. Serious enough that our former Surgeon General declared it a national catastrophe. And he's absolutely right about this, okay? More than 1 in 3 U.S. children are currently overweight. That's a very, very big problem. In Illinois, 35% of our children are either overweight or already classified as obese. That ranks us number 4 in the nation. Illinois is the 4th heaviest state in the country when it comes to its children. When we start talking about our low SES kids, our kids who are already the most at risk, academically, socially, behaviorally, et cetera, well, those children in that population, 55% are overweight and 30% are classified as obese. If you are a child from a low SES, your odds of ever overcoming your weight issues in your lifetime approach 0. They're very, very bad. So we've got children who are already disenfranchised in many ways, and they're going to have a health issue or health issues added on to that burden, not to mention the academic impact. So what's the hard truth, though? The hard truth is that regardless of the weight status of the child, most American children are currently malnourished, poorly nourished, physically inactive, and sleep deprived. And those 3 things, the axis of evil, if you will, those 3 things are wreaking havoc on a child's ability to learn, on their ability to interact socially, on their behavior patterns, and ultimately on their weight as well and their health as well. So why do teachers need to care about this? Well, you guys obviously care because you teach, because you like children, you care about the future of this country. But when I talk about health and weight and children, a lot of times the answer, or the question that I get, the first hand that goes up, says, well, I get all of this, Dr. Soroff, and that's all very well and good, but my job is to teach the children, my job is to educate the children, your job is to protect their health. You go do your job, I'll do my job, and everything will be well and good. So my answer to that is this, that children who are well nourished during the school day, not just at home, not just what mom and dad do, okay? During the school day, that means a decent breakfast that's not laden with sugar. We'll talk about what sugar does to the brain. That means a good snack. That means a decent lunch that's not laden with sugar and fat. Children who are well nourished during the school day perform better academically, socially, behaviorally, emotionally, and ultimately, longer term, physically. That's why we need our educators to care about this, okay? It impacts your academic bottom line. So why do we care about physical activity? Well, here you get an even bigger and more profound and more immediate bang for your buck when it comes to physical activity and children during the day. You have a child, a boy in particular, that you cannot get to listen, you cannot get to settle down, you cannot get to do the things you need him to do. What do we typically do? Time out, missed recess, time in the principal's office, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I do in my home with my, my 5 of demons from the apocalypse, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? I make them run laps around my house. Make them run laps. We've got a school in your district, Mathenia. Anybody here from Mathenia Elementary? Did you do Jump Start last year? And how did it work out for you? Yeah, well, we'll talk about that more. One of the things that we need to do is we need to get our children more physically active, not less. Punishment through the removal of opportunity to move for a child is a death sentence. I mean, in figurative, but also in literal terms, if you think long time. Kids need to move. They need to be able to be physically active. Our boys are different than our girls. Our boys need it even more than our girls do. And as we have put more and more rigor into, through No Child Left Behind and things like that, sitting still and working to the test and preparing for exams and meeting all those NCLB standards, or now meeting those Common Core standards, we have taken time away from the things that our children naturally need to do, which is move, okay? When we introduce more physical activity to their day, even if it's in 2-minute increments, I am not kidding you. I'm not talking about hours spent a day. I'm talking about 2-minute increments, and we have a program for this called Brain Breaks. Children's academic scores go up. There was a beautiful study done in Colorado a year ago, or 2 years ago now, looking at what happened in a school district when they introduced 240 minutes a week of MVPA, moderate to vigorous physical activity. It cut into time spent in reading and math. Their reading and math scores went up. Children perform better academically when they are more physically active. And there are very, very good reasons for this, and we'll talk about some of those. But this is why we care. And why do we care about our children being well rested? Well, we're going to look at the data that show that our children are the most sleep deprived that they have ever been in the history of children. Okay? 1 to 3 hours on average. It gets worse the older they get, obviously. Okay? All of the things that you see with sleep deprivation mimic almost exactly all of the symptoms that you see with ADHD. Almost to a symptom. Now, am I suggesting that ADHD does not exist? Of course I'm not. But I am telling you that we have seen unprecedented increases in the diagnosis of and the treatment of ADD, ADHD with very powerful psychotropic medications. At the same time that we're seeing there are probably other explanations for this rapid increase in these diagnoses. Okay? We need to be looking for the underlying causes of things, not just what kind of Band-Aid can we slap on it. All right, so I told you Steve Galston, the former Surgeon General, called the obesity epidemic catastrophic. I want you to watch this series of maps. You can see that most of the map is white and there's a little bit of light blue in here, okay? This shows you the incidence of obesity in the United States in 1985. And we're going to click through the years here. From an epidemiologist point of view, this is an epidemic unfolding. These maps will look no different if we were talking about the flu, or we were talking about smallpox, or we were talking about any kind of infectious disease. The only difference would be that the spread would be in a matter of days, weeks, and months rather than years. But watch what happens as we click through here. So we're at 1991 now. I jumped way ahead. Now you have 15 to 20% of the population is obese. Now we've just added more, greater than 20%. And there's a dark orange that shows you greater than 25%. Now we're adding in greater than 30%. I mean, you see how quickly this has happened over the course of 30 years. All right? Over the course of 30 years. Now remember, I told you, food can either be our greatest medicine or our most disastrous, insidious form of poison, okay? And the problem that we are facing in this country today is what we're putting into our bodies. It is the quality or lack of quality of nutrition that we are consuming. Well, that's David, and that's David after 6 months touring the U.S., okay? We just have the wrong types of foods that we consume in this country. Okay, so what's the impact of all of this? Well, it's multifactorial, and that's why it's so important, okay? It's impacting the health of our nation. There's no question about that. We'll talk a little bit about that. There are powerful, powerful academic impacts, not just for those children who currently have weight issues or currently have health issues as a result of their weight, but also for the child who's this big around, but is consuming a ½ pound of sugar a day. There are big-time academic impact that is associated with that. There also are health impacts coming at that child. They may not show up for 20 years, but they are coming for that child, okay? There are fiscal, there are social, there are quality of life, there are life expectancy, national security issues. Who would have thought about that? There are national security issues surrounding the fact that, as the Corps of Retired Generals wrote in a report 2 years ago, we as a nation are too fat to fight. This is a nationally released report. 30% of 18-year-olds trying to get into the Army are being turned away because of their weight. There are emotional and psychological issues associated with that. You know, from a national security perspective, you don't even have to look to our armed services to see where the problem can be. If as a parent, I am too unhealthy to run the 2 miles to my child's school In the case of a national disaster or catastrophe, an earthquake or tornado, something like that, that's a security issue for my community. I mean, I just attended a meeting that was talking about local preparedness, first responders, and what we're able to do and what we're not able to do. And a lot of first responder issues surround the idea that we should be able to dig each other out of the rubble. Well, to do that, you have to have a certain amount of strength, you have to have a certain amount of stamina, you have to have a certain amount of ability to help your neighbor out. So these are security issues not just on a national level, but also on a local level, because our first responder system relies heavily on my ability to help you and your ability to help me in case disaster strikes. Okay. What are the health consequences? These are profound, and they're worth going over even though you're not here to learn about health, okay? 90% of children who are overweight, we're not even talking about children who hit that BMI of 30, okay? We're just talking about children who have an unhealthy weight status, have hypertension, have risk factors for heart disease, including hypertension, high cholesterol or dyslipidemia, early atherosclerotic plaque formation, which is a really fancy way of saying that the arteries of their heart are starting to harden already. Okay, it's the stuff that causes heart attacks down the line, and type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes we didn't even see in children when I went to medical school. It wasn't something we even talked about when I went to medical school 15 years ago. That wasn't on our radar. We never saw, we used to call it actually adult onset and juvenile onset diabetes, type 2 and type 1. We don't do that anymore. We never saw type 2 diabetes in children. It's an absolutely devastating health consequence of the obesity epidemic. In fact, so much so that it got its own slide. The last decade has seen a dramatic increase in the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. If we do not reverse current trends, 1 in 3 Americans born after 2001 will develop diabetes sometime in their lifetime. 1 in 3. That's a horrifying statistic. The scariest thing about type 2 diabetes in children is the fact that it is so very, very hard for us to treat. As difficult as type 2 diabetes is in adults to treat and stay ahead of, it's 100 times more so in children. We do not have a good handle on how to help these kids. And the biggest problem is, I mean, look at these long-term consequences from type 2 diabetes. Blindness, renal failure, non-traumatic amputation, it's the 6th leading cause of death in adults. We're talking about a loss of 10 to 20 years of life expectancy if you have type 2 diabetes, okay? So for the average adult with type 2 diabetes, even if it's fairly well regulated, somewhere around 20 to 25 years, that person is going to begin developing significant health problems associated, end organ damage we call it. That's where you lose your eyesight, you lose your kidneys, you lose a leg, you lose an arm, whatever, usually a leg, okay? Well, what's 20 years out if you're 6? I mean, what's 20 years out if you're 16? We're talking about kids who are going to be profoundly affected in what should be the most productive years of their life. And that's what all of our public health officials are saying. We're going to see an exponential increase in heart disease and stroke, in cancer. The evidence suggests that heavier children have a 40% greater lifetime risk of cancer of all causes. And significant problems as this generation moves into their 20s and 30s. They are going to be disabled during what should be the most productive years of their life. That is absolutely unacceptable, and it all stems from what we're doing right now, or what we're failing to do for them right now. Because, you know, our children are not driving themselves to the grocery store. Our children are not ordering the food that we serve in our school cafeterias. Our children are not making the policies about whether they're allowed 20 minutes of recess or whether they're allowed PE every day. They don't make those decisions. We make those decisions for them, and we are inflicting on them a lifetime of consequences. And it's wrong. It's a lot of things, but I'm not allowed to say most of them with the camera rolling. All right. Life expectancy. We are expecting that this will be the first generation of children to live less long than its predecessor, a 5 to 10 year drop in life expectancy for this generation, just based on their weight now. There are huge fiscal consequences with this. I mean, and everywhere you turn on the news today, it's talking about how we're going bankrupt, we're going bankrupt, we're going bankrupt. Well, let me tell you something. This is going to be a bill we absolutely cannot afford. Hundreds of billions of dollars. I believe we spent almost $170 billion in this country last year paying for the consequences of obesity in adults. I don't know that anybody has done the analysis of what that projects out to 20 years from now. I haven't seen it if they have, but you can imagine what it's going to look like. All right, psychosocial consequences are profound. Children who are heavier have a much increased incidence of depression and anxiety. They have increased emotional and psychological dysfunction and increased risk of attempted and completed suicide. Okay? They don't attempt suicide at much greater incidence, but they have a much greater incidence of actually picking a methodology that is lethal. They have very poor self-image. There's a lot of self-loathing, self-harm, self-injurious behavior. You guys are starting to see cutting at younger and younger ages. Premature and risky sexual behavior in this category of children as well. They tend to really do a lot more risk-taking, probably due to the underlying poor self-esteem. More self-medication, and of course an increased vulnerability to bullying. The academic impact is equally profound. These children have lower standardized test scores. They have an increased incidence of absence and tardiness. They have behavioral problems, poorer emotional functioning. Their teachers and they both report an inability to concentrate. I think that comes back around to the foods that they eat and the lack of physical activity, and we'll talk some more about that. Decreased psychosocial functioning, increased anxiety and depression, and then again in the school grounds, increased vulnerability to bullying. So what causes all of this? Well, at its most basic, most distilled out, it is just an imbalance between energy in and energy out. What we're taking in and the way in which we expend it, okay? Everybody will say, you eat too much, you eat more than you're working off. The problem is it turns out to be a little bit more complicated than that because it is a form of malnutrition, which is not something that you typically associate with overweight, right? And I had a very, very lengthy conversation with a very, very intelligent policymaker in this state just recently who could not wrap his head around the fact that our poorest children are our most overweight children, that our families who are hungry, and he kept putting the quotes up, hungry and on food stamps are our most obese population in this state. But it is a form of malnutrition. They are malnourished, and our body interacts differently. Our body processes differently real food versus chemical food, okay? And the majority of what our poorest families are eating, the majority of what we are serving in our school cafeterias, if I may be so blunt, is chemical food. It's chemical based. It is no longer real food recognizable to these very highly evolved systems that we have. And I like to say, I really don't care what side of the door you come down on. Either we evolved in perfect harmony with our natural world and its foods, or we were created in natural harmony with our world and its foods. It doesn't make any difference. The end result is the same. Our bodies don't recognize and know what to do with the majority of these very highly processed artificial calories that we consume every single day, including refined sugar. They just don't know what to do with it. There's a wonderful, wonderful article out there, if any of you are interested in sugar in particular, that it's entitled, Is Sugar Toxic? And anybody here seen the high fructose corn syrup? I'm going to go off on a tangent for a minute. But the high fructose corn syrup commercials that say sugar, sugar, right? Okay, first of all, a colossal lie. I said that in front of the camera. It is a colossal lie, okay? High fructose corn syrup means that it has more of the fructose molecule in it than regular refined sugar, which in the final analysis is important, but not as important as the fact that actually sugar in all of its refined forms, whether it's table sugar or corn sugar, is toxic to our livers, okay? So there's some really good research coming out of University of California looking at this, and we're going to look in a little bit about how much sugar we actually are consuming in a day. But that is one example of the tremendous amount of artificial calories we're taking into our bodies. We don't even think about sugar as being artificial anymore, do we? Unless we're talking literally about artificial sweeteners, but we don't think about refined sugar as being anything other than natural. Okay. So, malnutrition is at its core just faulty nutrition due to an inadequate or unbalanced uptake of nutrients. This is a problem facing both our overweight and our normal weight children. If you have a child who is consuming 2,000 calories a day, 1,000 calories of which are refined sugar, another 500 calories of which are, sort of garbage refined other calories, that child is malnourished. I really don't care if he's only this big around. All that means is that he's young and it hasn't caught up with him yet. But that is a child who is malnourished. And believe me, those calories are wreaking havoc on his ability to focus, to concentrate, to learn. And it will eventually catch up with him. All right? Our children are taking in too many non-nutritive calories. They have inadequate exposure to and consumption of fresh vegetables and fruit, and massive overconsumption of added sugars, fats, and trans fats in particular. Upwards of a third of all American children eat fast food every single day. That is in addition to the fast food that they are being served in school through the National School Breakfast and Lunch Program. Because what we are serving our children in school is fast food. It qualifies, okay? There's been a doubling and tripling of portion sizes in the past 20 years, and here's probably the most important paragraph in the whole talk. Because I want you to think back to those maps that we were talking about. And I showed you that in 1980, less than 10% of the American population had a weight problem. In 2012, 65 to 75% of the American population, depending on where you live and what demographic you're talking about, has a weight problem. Well, what has happened since 1980? Well, we've radically changed the way in which we eat. In 1980, more than three-quarters of all food dollars were spent on the purchase of fresh foods for at-home preparation. We were eating real calories. Today, more than three-quarters of all food dollars are spent either eating out or purchasing prepackaged, pre-made, pre-boxed, pre-frozen food-like substances. Not real food, food-like substances. All right? We have a saying, if it don't rot, don't eat it. Anybody ever take a McDonald's hamburger and put it on the shelf and walk away? Try it, because I'm not lying to you. Come back a week later, come back 2 weeks later. The bun will still be soft and there will be no mold growing. If it don't rot, don't eat it. Our bodies don't know what to do with these calories, okay? It's atrocious grammar, but you'll all remember it. So to those of you who are English professors or who have an English professor as a mother, as I do, I apologize, but I like the punch of it. Okay. So now we're going to talk about sugar for just a minute, because every major medical institution in the entire world, including the World Health Organization, say that added sugars, refined sugars, should make up no more than 10% of your total daily discretionary calories, okay? For a woman my size, my height, my weight, not trying to lose weight, just trying to maintain, that means I can eat approximately somewhere between 7 and 8 teaspoons of added sugar in a day. 7 to 8 teaspoons of added sugar in a day, okay? Men always get away with a little bit more. Remembering roughly how tall you are, I'd say you probably get 10 or 11. But guys get 2 glasses of wine at night, women only get 1. I mean, all of these moderation things, the guys always come out ahead. All right, so about 25 grams for women, about 38 grams for men, okay? Now that's less than what I just said. Here's what is happening in this country. The average American child is consuming more than 25% of their total daily calories in the form of refined sugar. That number approaches 40% with our lowest income children. The sugar is hidden everywhere. It's in everything because the food industry knows it's one of the 3 things that make your taste buds stand up and salute: sugar, salt, and fat. And they love to put them together in really, really creative ways, okay? Added sugar consumption has increased more than 50% since 1980s. Estimates put children's daily consumption between 100 and 200 grams. Nobody's looked super, super carefully at this. I think that they don't really want to know. Also, we have a very, very powerful sugar lobby in this country, all right? But the best data that I've been able to find puts it somewhere close to 180 grams most of the time in most of those studies. 4 grams of sugar is a teaspoon. That adds up to 50 teaspoons of sugar per child per day. How many did I say I could have? About 7? 40 to 50 added teaspoons. Now, who would do that? Who would sit and where on earth is all that sugar coming from? This is the #1 place. Our sugar sweetened beverages. But look at all of